Luck in the Gardens by Sylvia Feketekuty, and read by Kyle Bond. I've been called many things. A liar, a knave, a scoundrel, even a hero once or twice. I don't like being called lucky, though. That comes and goes, and it's best not to be superstitious about it. Oh, a lord of fortune shunning luck? Very funny, you wits. Luck is twisting things to your own good, or noticing when they go well. Aren't we lucky to be here this evening? To sit by a fire with a barrel of beer rolled out of the cellar an hour ago, and a circle of what I might call the best drinking companions I've had for some time here in Daresmude. Ones, I might add, who were very kind to so patiently listen to me begin this humble story. Because for all I've just complained about it, maybe luck was with me in Minrathous. I'm not sure how I survived that city otherwise. Have another round with me, for I'll need it to ease into the remembering. Minrathous. Oldest and most astounding and most vile place I've ever made coin in. Give me the fresh coasts of Vervain over any city, and Ferelden's strapping lads over any other kind, but you have to be impressed by Minrathous. It towers. Their titanic buildings block out the sun, some even float in the air, kept there by ancient, crackling magic. From the incense-spewing temples to the stink of the slave markets, to the dragons carved across every inch of stone. History bleeds from the rock. Its crowds are like nothing you've ever seen. A sweating, shouting, arguing, laughing river of people sloshing through the streets. And let me tell you, every Tevinter noble's breeding goes out the window when their palanquins stopped behind a broken ox cart or dance troupe. Some of those swears sounded like they came from the dawn of the Imperium. Now, beware of who you steal from in Tevinter, and not just because they found a way to make prison crueler than in Starkhaven or Orlais. You slip a purse from the wrong belt, and it can be a hapless bodyguard or a cringing maid who gets blamed. For everyone there knows slaves are shifty. Oh, well, maybe it doesn't bother you. But a Lord of Fortune's got to have some standards that sets them apart from common glory seekers. And that's one for me. Therefore, it was with great pleasure I spotted a man wearing the vestments of a slaver, clearly alone, yelling at a pair of lithesome dancing girls to move out of his way. After a tumble and cringing apologies, "Watch yourself, man. Pardon, sir, pardon," I slipped away with a pouch of coins he had no right to anyway. I'd been given a tip on where to find information for a job in the city. I made my preparations and changed. I fancy myself decent at disguises, and I know my way around a cut of clothes. Makeup and wigs I learned on a stage in Ferelden, and an elven friend taught me posture and how to curl a voice high or low. She said I had an uncanny vocal range, although she had me beat on accents. To this day, I can't match her knack for imitating a free marcher's brogue. Through this tale, people call me Sir and Madam, but I've always just thought of myself as myself, and had great fun in the bargain. Well, of course I can also disguise myself as some of the other peoples. There are things the mind focuses on first, you see. We recognize dwarves by their width as well as their stature. Elves are slim, but it's their eyes and ears we recall. Humans have the most variety in the shoulders, and all anyone sees about Kunari are height and horns. What was that? Yes, you're right. Enough boasting about my craft now. Back to the job in Minrathous. I waited at an inn that stank of the fish being gutted on the dock, until the moon topped the towers of the Archon's palace. Then I made for a tall, skinny building like hundreds of others around the docks. As I slipped along the paths by the canals, a low fog curled around the water. There were splashes, not unusual, but combined with the way the fog moved, it bothered me after a while. It was as if there was something stirring up in the mist that I wasn't fast enough to see. It didn't help at some point I thought I'd heard a sigh coming out of some dark grate by the canal. I told myself it was nerves, just some fish looking for a way back to the sea. When I came across a splash of blood, kicking one sloping brick wall. I stared dumbly. The blood, still wet, was sprayed far up the brickwork. It could have been gutted fish flopping about, or the remains of some fellow in a bad way. Looking back now, I'm not sure that's all it was, but at the time I pressed on. If I'd known what was going to happen, if I'd been able to read that omen, there's a good chance I'd have run to the docks to throw myself on the first boat out of the city. When I eventually got to the tall building that was my target, the door was forbiddingly barred. So I crawled through an unlatched painted window 3 stories above. Sorry? No ropes. Only pythons. 5 years in Master Ignaldo's fabulous circus of Ravane will cure you of a fear of heights, one way or another. Anyhow, what looked like a salt-encrusted clapboard building from the outside was just as dull inside. For the first 2 floors, someone had converted the third into a golden-pillowed luxury. Velvet couches and silk-covered lounges sat arranged like they were awaiting a party. Marble side tables held goblets and pitchers and crystal bowls. An enormous table of solid oak, polished and glossed to a sheen, had been hauled up 3 flights by some unlucky sods. The last extravagance was dozens of globes of colored glass, strung from the ceiling that clinked as I brushed them on my way down. A cabinet full of bottles was a fraction less full after my inspection, but only a fraction. I had to stay sharp. I retreated into a rafter ledge, where I could see and not be seen. After an hour, some elves, dressed like paid servants, not slaves, to my surprise, arrived to fill the bowls with fruit and the pitchers with wine. For light, they chimed metal sticks against those glass globes, which began to glow. Oh, that sort of magic is everywhere in Minrathous. What they consider mere conveniences would delight and amaze us poor barbarians. The servants left, and soon after their masters swept into the place. Not all of the finely dressed mages were magisters of the Imperial Senate. Some were only breathtakingly wealthy. They sat down at the table, and a servant brought out a pack of cards. And the camaraderie began. "It's your turn, Manias. Come on, man, take your drubbing." "Oh, I think he's saving that for the Sawing Pearl this evening." There was raucous laughter, and Manias threw down a hand that was decent, but not enough to beat the table. Another round began. I was pleased my informant's word was good. This was a secret game of wicked grace for the slumming elect. Mages who discreetly set up a club in the last place anyone would look for them. As the mages bet on piles of coins that would make a miser weep, the group was jovial and chatty as a flock of birds, and snippy as our Legion dowagers. "Xanthan, work on the latest Triatsic a bit slow lately. You've hardly a tan this summer." "Whatever you think, Peletra, it's going perfectly." "I hear Otho's having trouble with his nephew again." "One has to admire the lengths he's gone to hide it. It's rather touching." "Speaking of family, a cousin of mine just came from Verantium. Did you hear what happened to Forfex the wig-maker?" My back and neck grew stiff as I waited for hours until the boozy conversation circled to what interested me. "Did you see those flyers plastered on the door?" "I can't believe they've increased the asking price for that monster, or demon, or whatever it is." "Did Elorana put up that reward for its body? She's been buying all sorts of creatures lately. One of the colleagues must be footing the bill. Some new exotica from the senior enchanters to brag about to the Archon's next bill." "Still, 5,000 aurum. The beast must have killed someone important to increase the price accordingly." "It hadn't, as far as I knew." A few hours' careful work with a quill and some blotting paper had produced a passable forgery of the notices plastered all around the dockside. I had inflated the price in order to grab attention, and pasted the false flyer on this building and the surrounding streets. My hope was it'd catch these well-connected mages' interests, and steer their conversation toward what they knew about the monster. Well pleased it had actually worked, I risked crawling out a bit farther, so as not to miss anything. Well, let's hope someone catches it before the grisly thing starts picking its victims from higher in the city. Perhaps the Templars could prove they're worth the Chantry's levies, and hunt the damn thing down. I bet you this monster is a common demon, let in by some lazy oaf. No shortage of them up in the towers. Oafs or demons. I heard it's something to do with the Venatori. That felled them. Every mage looked up from their cups or cards, and turned to a skinny man with a topknot. His expression puckered. Don't look at me like that. The man threw down his hand of cards. I quit them ages ago. Come now, Castilius. A mage with a curled mustache and trim beard smiled at him. We all know you didn't go south with the cult to fight the Inquisition. You wouldn't exactly be here if you had. Exactly. Castilius looked relieved. I only attended a few meetings. The Venatori had some powerful magisters, you know. I was curious what they had to say. Of course. Just the same curiosity that makes you take supper with Magister Dulcia now and then. Always keeping those options open, yeah? Very sagacious. From Castilius's sour face, I assumed Magister Dulcia was part of the Venatori cult. You never heard of them, really? Power-grubbing fanatics who wanted to restore the glory of the Tevinter Imperium, or some slavering nonsense. Their possible involvement excited the mages at the table, who all spoke at once. I crept a handspan closer. Is this a Venatori abomination, then? What have those idiots done now? I say, Dulcia hasn't married again, has she? Castilius waved a hand. I'll only speak if you stop baying. They quieted. My supporting beam creaked for one heart-stopping moment. I swallowed, but no one below noticed. This is all I know. The Venatori didn't make the monster or wake it. They just encountered it during a search for some old cave under the city. It is not a demon, and it killed every mage in their expedition. Dulcia said the Venatori didn't put up the reward for the monster. Not that she's Venatori, he added hastily. But an interesting thing that her connections told her. That was the moment my wood beam cracked. With a shout, I turned my plummet into a series of artless skips down the wall, before I hit a blessedly soft couch like a sack. The silence stretched awfully. My head was buried in sequined pillows. Then I heard the mage with the mustache, loud and exasperated. Andraste's sacred bowels! You're supposed to be keeping lookout! I popped my head up. The mage was in front of the couch. He winked one gray eye at me, then declared, You know my mother's been trying to discover this little hideaway before her son fritters away the family fortune. Why did I put you up in the rafters if not to watch that road for his servants? I threw myself on the ground in front of him, sniveling and craven. Forgive me, my lord. The wood looked solid, but it was rotten. My presence explained away. The other mages at the table were either chuckling or growing bored. A statuesque woman with blonde hair fanned herself with her cards. Is she with you, then? Oh, yes, May. The mage threw up his hands. Honestly, if dear Horlicks wasn't the finest markswoman I've ever seen, she'd be scrubbing pots for the rest of her days. No cuts, broken bones? Only the shame of my failure pains me, my lord. I get the idea. He sighed heavily. This has rather spoiled the evening for me. I think I'll take my leave, ladies and gentlemen. Come along, Horlicks. I picked myself up, bowed without looking into anyone's eyes, and limped after. My savior's retinue was waiting below, the same servants who'd prepared the place. He went out into the street, where he turned to me. "I admit it's a bit of a put-on," the mage said. "Upstanding Tevinter mages sneaking off from their spouses or paramours to play wicked grace in a dangerous part of the city, armed only with magic and an army of servants. Still, they think it spices up the evening's entertainment. Dorian Parvis, by the way. Fabulous acrobatics back there. And you are? I've taken a liking to Horlicks." It got a laugh. "Horlicks was the name of my mother's dear departed pet nug, you know. It means something like irresponsible rascal in old Tevin. A fine pedigree. Let me invite you to supper. I promise if I wanted to cause any trouble, I'd already have done so. Besides," he plucked a flyer peeking out of my vest, one of the reward notices with the conspicuously altered price. "I think we have something to talk about." I had a very good light supper in a suite of white marbled rooms above and away from the docks. We were so high you could see over the trees of the public gardens. They were fed by an enormous, round reservoir, covered in carvings of bellowing dragons that towered over one end of the greenery. As people strolled along the bowers, the plants flickered with light. No, it wasn't just lanterns, I mean light, glowing leaves. Dorian finished his glass. "They say Minrathous never sleeps," he told me. "It does, but only when the sun rises and everyone needs a good break from all that exhausting skullduggery. What do you think of the gardens?" "Are they magic?" "That light show certainly is. Personally, I feel it ruins their mystique." He noticed me sip from my cup. "The wine's a gift from a dear friend. Lady Montilier sends me a few choice bottles from her vineyards, but as a Ravani, perhaps you're obliged to scoff at the Antivan Red." "Their wine is decent," I allowed. "A lord of fortune doesn't take Antiva and Ravain's rivalries so seriously. Where's the glory in it?" "How does one make a living as a treasure hunter?" He paused. "Wait, that answers my own question. Allow me to rephrase. How does one survive a living as a treasure hunter?" "It's different for everyone. I drank some more of what was in fact a damnably excellent wine. But you'd be surprised how often common sense just gets in the way." My glass was somehow empty. Dorian nodded at a servant who floated up with a pitcher. I remarked that he was the first mage of his station I'd seen whose household employed servants, not slaves. Dorian grimaced. "It's relatively recent, I'm ashamed to say. Someone I met in the south changed my mind on the matter." "You certainly came back with some fresh views," someone behind us said. I turned to see the tall, splendidly dressed woman Dorian had spoken to at the card game sweep into the room. She had such a presence. You turned to her like you do the first breeze of spring. "Magister Maevaris Talani. Don't let the name frighten you off, darling. Dorian and I are on the outs with most of the rest of the magisterium, if that helps." She held out a hand. I lifted it and kissed it lightly. "You grace Horlicks, this humble servant, with your presence." Maevaris smiled, curly gold locks bouncing as she shook her head. "This one's trouble, Dorian. It takes a special sort of charmer to make a compliment like that work." Dorian waved his goblet at the couch. "My guest and I have been getting on splendidly." "You must be." Maevaris sat, looking at me as she tilted her head at Dorian. "He's not one to invite just anyone up here." "Your very attentions flatter, magisters." "You've never been a servant in your life, have you?" "Not long," I conceded to the shrewdness in those eyes. "But the practice has come in useful from time to time." Dorian stretched and sighed. "Well, That's enough wine and scintillating conversation. We have business.
We're skipping the friendly gossip.
You only want to talk about the magisterium. Why you love seeing me so raggedly depressed, May, I can't understand.
Our duty to our country means being well informed about it, she shrugged. I mean it, dear heart. What has you worried?
This. Dorian put the reward paper on the table among the three of us. It would pay out 5,000, all right, 1,000, aurum for the body of the monster slaughtering people on the docks, delivered to the imperial offices that settled monster bounties. Do you know who put up the original, much more frugal reward? Dorian asked.
You, I ventured.
A quick learner, or a good guesser. Either way, I've been hoping someone with a promise would show up for this.
How come?
Dorian looked annoyed. It's killing people. We're not all heartless up here, few that we are. I don't like the idea of something like this in my city.
Maevaris picked up the paper. Neither do I. You overheard us at the card table, Hollix. The mages there won't do anything about this monster until it snags one of their own. That's not likely to be soon, if ever. I eyed the iron staff Dorian had propped up in one corner. No, I'm no mage, but I'm a decent judge of equipment. And the shaft had chips and scratches that looked like they'd been earned in battle. Maevaris wasn't armed, but no mage in Tevinter's ruling body can't fight their way out of a corner. I know that much. Why not hunt it down yourselves? I asked them. As much as it distresses me to say it, politics. There's foul rumblings in Tevinter's magisterium, and we've been spending all of our time keeping an eye on its scoundrels. Dorian sighed. You saw some earlier. May and I are trying to win a few of them over. It's been slow. Maevaris put the flyer down, still elegant, still relaxed, but with a harder undertone. But we're giving them a chance to prove they're not complete fools. I nodded, uncomfortable with the talk. Well, wouldn't you be? Enjoyable as the hosts were, I was eager to move on away from Tevinter politics to a threat I could actually see. Tell me about the monster, I said. Dorian produced a map. It was a wonderful piece of work. Crisp letters, bright inks, and a master's eye for details. There's been 9 people killed so far. Here, here, and here. Each was found decapitated. The criers and balladeers have charmingly dubbed our killer Sycorax, which is a rather suspect kludging of the old Tevin word for headsman. Dorian rolled up the map and presented it to me inside a cylinder, decorated with indigo sapphires. Any doubts I had that he was good for 1,000 aurum evaporated. Here, I'm afraid that's all I have. Be very careful, darling. Maevaris looked serious. There's no shortage of creatures that have become changed by magical experiments in this city. Not to mention Tevinter's naturally occurring enchanted predators, Dorian added. They're all dangerous, cunning, and usually hungry. You don't think Sycorax is an exception, I said. No, Dorian replied, especially considering the gods never found its victims' heads. I thanked Dorian for his generosity, then ransacked his storerooms for a few items, though I'm not sure he discovered that until I left. Then I slept off my bruise from my tumble at my inn. It was brightest noon when I woke, but the thought of 1,000 aurum dragged me out of bed. I headed to a garment-making district. The last killings had happened in that maze of red stone, behind the dye-pots and rows of looms. I worked my charm and redistributed the contents of the slaver's purse. There was one tricky moment when a pair of thieves thought I might be a scouting rival, after I explained I was a lord beholden to fortune, looking for the Sycorax. They laughed darkly and wished me luck. Talk? The weavers happily talked. People living in fear are in a mood to gripe. Sorting through the rumors, someone seemed to have escaped the monster and lived. I let it be known that I wanted to speak with them, found shade in a wilting palm grove, and took out the reward flyer. Every place people had been killed was close to water, and off the main roads. Unfortunately, that covered half of Minrathous. I needed something. I looked up and saw a child squinting down at me through the palm fronds. With children, you'd best decide how you want to deal with them right at the start, and see it through. Since she looked bored, I went with honesty. "The city needs a monster killer," I told her, waving the flyer. "I've killed monsters." "You can't kill that one," the girl declared. She had a missing tooth and a dark face, speckled with freckles, like a spray of rain. "Nobody knows where it is." "How do you know nobody knows?" "I listen to people." She said it with the air of one talking to a well-meaning dolt. "Besides, if they'd seen it, they'd have drawn it up on the poster." She had me there. "Isn't that a bit high?" "Nope." She swung all of the way upside down by her knees, then up again. The girl was dressed in fine-looking rags, something scavenged from a good home. "Bet you can't do that." I shrugged and crouched, then sprang up the curved bole of the palm tree and somersaulted backward to land in the thick crown of the palm next to hers. Their fruits were purple and red. "Is this one ripe?" The girl closed her jaw and considered. "Take the other one. That one's got spots." I did, and bit. The bulb was warm and soft, and had a tang under the sweetness. Wiping the juice off my face, I said, "Tell me, young lady." "It's Mizzy, mister." "Mizzy, what do you know about the Sycorax?" I waved the paper again. "Well..." "Yes?" "It killed my friends." She tried to sound matter-of-fact. "Templars took the bodies away to burn them, but I snuck in before that happened, and I saw them laid out in rows on tables, and their heads were all gone." I stopped chewing. "I'm sorry." "It's all right." The girl studied her hands, stretching out thin arms. "They weren't closest friends." "I'll kill the beast that took them. On my honor," I said, trying to sound gallant. Then I cursed myself. Why I promised that tall order to a child, I don't know. "Can you tell me what the Sycorax looked like?" Mizzy shook her head. "When it happened, I was on my way to my sister's, who's such a good cook that she got freed, and now she cooks for money. And I was on Blue Hook Street because my friends lived there with their ma and pa at the rug merchant's back house. And I was by that canal when I heard shouting and screaming, and there was something in the water, but when I told my sister and she got the guards, everyone was dead." We digested the picture in silence. "So you didn't see anything?" I eventually asked. "Not much," she answered. "But I know how the monsters got in the house." Mizzy took me to a sewer behind the shack her friends had lived in. The grate was tall as 3 men, but barred. I expressed doubt anyone could cram themselves through, but Mizzy insisted the thing she saw had slithered back that way. Looking at the map, it was true. Every victim had been killed near one of those gigantic gutters. Farther down was a hole, big enough for work people and such to fit into. "Do I hear you repeating that old adage with a smirk? It's true some of Minrathous' upper streets are paved in marble, but her sewers stink like everywhere else's. Believe me." I waded through the tunnels. Some minutes in, I saw part of the walls glow. A sickly blue, like you get from deep mushrooms. I trailed in strips across the wall and ceiling, as if someone had dropped ropes as thick as your arm in paint, then dragged them along the masonry. The glow was bright enough to show me bronze plates stamped by the ceiling with the names of less fragrant streets above. The farther I went, the brighter the glow, and I started hearing something. Not splashing, faint and coarse. It came when I was moving and stopped when I didn't. That made me take out my saber, which is what saved me when the Sikorax came. I was going round a turn when a thrashing mass of tentacles shot out of the cracks and water. I yelled and slashed, lopping off a dozen grasping, roiling feelers. The thing's wormy bulk swung, and milky flesh peeled back to reveal... I don't know. A blade? It was silvery, but air bent round it like cleaved space. It slashed arcs that cut the rope behind me like soft butter. I ran. Ropes writhed along the ceiling after me, and some of them opened up eyes. Ordinary people's eyes. Studded into the flesh like jewels on a fancy sword sheath. Sikorax's voice was many voices speaking together, all tiny and softly rotten.
Slip gently.
A rope of tentacles splattered behind me. There was a delicate noise like air tearing. Part of my cloak fluttered into the muck. I ran faster, legs pumping. The thing loped off more cloth, like it was playing.
Stay with us,
it cooed. It's hard to explain the joyful malice radiating out from it. You could feel it, like cold in the winter.
Come inside, where it's warm. There is room in the crown of the blind.
Still running, I twisted to block with my saber. The air hummed. I felt a sting on my cheek, and my blade fell to pieces. Weaponless, bleeding, lungs on fire, I dug something I'd cobbled together from the supplies from Dorian's storehouse and threw it hard at the Sikorax. The secret of smoke pellets is this. Never throw them by your feet. Aim at whoever or whatever is chasing you, preferably at the eyes. Black, oily clouds bloomed out of the pellet satchel, filling the tunnel. It saved me, but not the way I'd thought. I peered back, still running, to see the damn monster bunching its tentacles around inky curls, prodding and palpating the stuff. It was examining the smoke. Whenever its pale limbs touched each other, they fused together. When it flexed, they split and reformed. Others tangled up, slowly reabsorbing as they lazily rippled through its main wormy mass. I tell you, friends, I still can't enjoy a plate of octopus after that. I made it around another corner, but heard,
"Come back, visitor,"
as loud as if the Sikorax had been breathing into my ear. I saw a lone tentacle roping across the pipes above me.
"I am a sweeter ending than you know. Things are rising."
It modulated down to a whisper and unsheathed its silver.
"Stay safe inside of me."
I scooped up a brick and threw. There was a satisfying splat, and the crumpled thing shot backwards, leaving a trail of bright, glowing slime behind it. At last, I was by an exit. I scrambled up the ladder and slammed the iron cover down. I hadn't come out onto a street, but the bottom of a stairwell. No worries, I thought, as I lurched up, blood trickling down my face. I'd climb up 100 staircases before I went down there again. So long as this place was dry and safe, I was for it. Which is how I ended up stumbling out of a storage closet into a Templar barracks. Only water left? Let's get another barrel, shall we? Much obliged. Where was I? Right. So I spent the next 15 minutes dodging armored brutes trying to throw me in jail for trespassing with malicious intent. That's what they shouted, anyway. The Templars in Tevinter, unlike the rest of the world, lack the ability to stop magic. They're only guards with fancy equipment doused in lyrium. It gives them chips the size of trees on their shoulders, if you ask me, and might explain their surliness. After dodging the chase, I scrubbed myself clean on a weedy beach. It washed off my makeup, but better salty and wind-chapped than wear the stink of that sewer for another moment. Wrapping my face in a scarf, I returned to the inn so I could change my clothes, give the old ones up for burning, and examine the map of Minrathous. Right then I felt someone else should sort out that monster, money be damned. But I did feel obliged to at least give Dorian Pavis a location, a description of the Sikorax, and a hearty handshake before I left. So after a blessed change of clothes, I set out to find the building that stood over where I'd met the Sikorax below. I certainly wasn't going back to the sewers, but I could give Dorian its rough location before I fled the city. So I went by Minrathous' many stairs and crenellated walkways, avoiding canals and cesspits completely. In defiance of my encounter with the Sikorax, the sun was shining brilliantly. The map led me into an enormous terrace, suspended over a swath of climbing, glittering plants, and trickling fountains. These were the vast gardens I'd spied from Dorian's suite. What's that? Yes, to my surprise. Even in the sun the plants shimmered with light. It was subtler in the daytime, but gave everything a sort of jeweled look. All this sat above the Sikorax's lair, a solid 3 floors above the ground. Despite the sun, as I walked past statues of stern magisters, a melancholy settled over me. A Lord of Fortune doesn't like giving up. True, this wasn't some glorious jewel begging to be freed. It was a monster I couldn't fight. If I'd had a crew with me... But I didn't. Not in that city. I was dressed in an Orlesian mask and cloak, which wouldn't attract much attention from strutting mages. So I decided the gardens would be my last taste of Minrathous' luxury. There was laughter in those gardens, and rose bowers, and loops of arbor blessing, and sweet apples with their own perfume, and vendors hawking sticky figs rolled in nuts, and a pool, lush with dawn lotuses. Waterfalls showered the ponds thanks to cleverly hid aqueducts ferrying water from the looming reservoir. Tiny butterflies flapped everywhere. An illusion, I learned, when a flock passed harmlessly through my arm. "Where's that next round?" "Ah, good. Thank you kindly." My wandering took me to a stand of trees around a pond. Thick birches studded with large holes, the way they get sometimes. Birds had built nests in them. I peeked at one. Empty. The next 2 were likewise. There was another, deeper in the stand. I walked a few lazy paces and peered in, and was met with a nest of bones. Bodies of a dozen birds of all sizes. Headless. They had been piled carefully to form a dome. It was a grotesque sort of style. The birds were all turned the same way, as if the flock was chasing itself down. I stumbled back into the clearing. Only grabbing a branch saved me from dunking my idiot arse into the pond. The birch next to me shuddered, and I watched as a white tendril slid out of a hole in the bark and opened up a wet, brown eye. The Sikorax tittered. I slowly retreated, step by questing step, back onto the main stone path. Some of those birds' necks had been freshly bloodied. I felt unshakably it wasn't some old collection. The Sikorax had placed it there in the clearing, fresh, just for me. As I walked in a slow daze, I could now see the faintest undercurrent of blue in the hollow tree trunks housing the Sikorax. Snug as a spider. The more I looked, the more I picked out its coils running behind the grass by a wall, around the base of trees perfectly camouflaged in the hanging vines. I tried not to shake. I and everyone strolling along were surrounded by a perfect predator. The Sikorax was nestled throughout the entire gardens. Whatever I'd seen below was the smallest part of it.
"Visitor,"
its pulpy voice whispered as I edged to the gates. Eyes suddenly blinked on a strand of ropes shifting in the shade next to me.
"Watcher."
Far down the path was an elven slave trudging after a chattering mage. A tentacle slid through the grass, inflict the hem of the elf's robes. He stopped and looked around, puzzled. Nothing there. He didn't see the second appendage rear up from a thicket, fraying open to reveal a cutting edge. A jug smashed into it. I barreled in, loud and doing my best imitation of an Orlesian accent. "Sirs, watch out, please!" The mage turned. His surprise quickly became annoyance. "I'm sorry." "A venomous drake adder!" I leaned on my legs as if tired from a short run in my thick dress, shaking my head. "I didn't think you had them in Tevinter."
"What are you on about?"
"See here." I lifted the bush. There was a smear of milky blue, glowing softly in the shade. "It is a most poisonous snake. We have many in Ghislaine. I am afraid I only wounded it, but the animal was preparing to strike." "Well, no, I can't do anywhere near a Ghislaine accent. I've never been to Ghislaine, but see, neither have most people in Tevinter." The Sycorax's blood left a powerful stench. The mage sniffed the air.
"That does smell foul."
He backed away.
"Well, thank you, madame. You've saved me the trouble of training up a new, amanuensis, Florix?"
Florix kept his face carefully straight as he gave a strained laugh. "Ha, as you say, master." They left, taking a causeway out of the gardens and into a colossal tower in the curved shadow of the reservoir.
Fortunate.
The Sycorax gurgled too close beside me. It didn't sound angry. I can't tell you why, but I had the feeling I amused it. Why shouldn't I? I hadn't done any real damage grabbing that watering jug and hurling it. As in the sewer, I'd just managed to slow it down. The gate out of the gardens was so close. Could I outrun it? Would it let me go? Would it permit me a few steps, then lop my head off and hide my body in a lotus pond?
No more false faces. No more masks. Become soft and blind in the crown of me.
That energized me. My art is my own, and no maker-forsaken thing was going to take it. I ran past the gates to shade and freedom.
There will be others.
Maybe I imagined it, but I thought I heard something wistful as the Sycorax added,
They will be joined in me.
I shoved my way through the crowds, heading for the docks. I'd send a letter to Dorian, I told myself. At least he'd believe me. I was done with the place. This wasn't my city. As if to agree, there was a whip crack, and a cart full of dull-eyed elves and humans in chains lumbered by. I lurched to the left, seeing freedom in the sails of the clippers and galleons preparing to depart with the tide.
"Hey, you!"
Silver flashed off an armored Templar pointing at me. I was just as floored as I'd been by the Sycorax. A second-rate Templar seeing right through one of my disguises from several houses away.
"Look there!"
The Templar cried.
"It's the one with that fancy map case!"
Aha! I was only a dolt carrying very recognizable jewels. I ran. This time it was harder. The Templars had me pegged for a serious thief. Sorry? Well, yes, true, but I hadn't stolen anything worth the run they gave me. I vaulted up across the rooftops with an ease that had the crowds clapping, but there was always a Templar in the next street, a silver fist on the walkway. Eventually I was cornered in a short alley by 6 of them, their swords and maces ready. There's no one who looks as cross as a Templar you've just made run several city streets in full armor. I tried to decide between running up sheer stone or begging for mercy before hitting one in the eye. Then someone dropped a golden flask on the Templar's head. There was a pop. Lightning sizzled. The Templars yelled and beat at their armor. "Up here!" a voice hissed. That urchin Mizzy was hanging out of a window. I could reach it with help. I ran, jumping onto one of the Templars.
Lightning flashed. I felt like I'd been bitten by a snake, but I pushed off the howling woman, teeth gritting, and my fingers found the ledge. Many rooftops later, I was satisfied we'd lost them. I turned to thank Mizzy, who was staring.
"What were you doing at the docks?"
she asked. How did you know it was me?
"You've got that map case."
She peered at me.
"You were moving different too, until the guards saw you."
Have you been following me?
"I'm bored. Your skin's all painted."
Orlesian custom, I said, touching the heavy makeup with a finger. This shade by the neck is all the rage in Valroyo. What was in that flask? Mizzy took another flask somewhere out of her clothes. Something crackled inside it like a miniature storm cloud.
"I run messages for a chemist mage who makes them, and sometimes she throws out bottles that don't work right. And she don't care if I take 'em. It's magic. It makes you faster when the lightning comes out. Did you know lightning hates metal?"
Minrathis, a city where magic's so common it gets thrown into a gutter. Well, thank you.
"Were you going to leave?"
No, I lied. I've found the Sikorax. A mage and I, a good mage, are thinking of a way to kill it. I stood up and brushed off my cloak. It'll be dead before you know it. By the way, stay away from the gardens.
"Oh.
All right." It was those flat little words that stopped me. I looked at Mizzy and saw her lip tremble, and realized she knew I'd lied, but was pretending. That her friends, killed by a monster, were worth avenging. That someone in this grinding city would help. That a funny stranger in fancy dress would turn out to be, if not a hero, a decent imitation of one. All the while, the crackling clouds in the bottle kept turning. My breath caught, and something broke open in my head. A reckless, perilous plan. But one I knew I had to chance if I ever wanted to call myself a lord of fortune in good standing. "Mizzy," I asked, "how would you like to make 100 arum?" The girl gaped. Then her eyes brightened. Imagination had won.
"For what it's worth, mister."
She looked at the dress.
"Mrs.?"
It's Mrs. when I'm in this outfit. Anyhow, we'll need mages, and a trip to your alchemist, and... My fingers twitched, as they do when I'm on a sudden upswing. Best do this at night, Mizzy. Dorian's patronage or not, I felt it best to be cautious after the debacle with the Templars and the map case. Besides, what I was planning needed a certain amount of discretion. People would never have questions after we put my plan into motion. Never mind that if it worked, they should thank me. I've learned not to overestimate gratitude with these things. So, people saw a human magister sweep into an alchemist's shop. After deep consultation with the doddering woman, she purchased a variety of eye-wateringly dangerous powders. A cloaked dwarf, newly emerged from the underground and complaining about the sun, purchased a Kunari-style harpoon from a purveyor of slightly reclaimed weaponry. It was a smudgy elf child who ran through the public gardens, pretending to clean refuse while clandestinely placing sacks underneath benches and a package in the crook of a fountain. She was later met by a hunched Kunari slave, hobbling with her into the press of the streets. Then, after I wiped the makeup from Mizzy's squirming face and changed into the clothes I'd worn when I first met him, we visited Dorian Pavis. He let us in with a raised eyebrow, and was very good about not throwing me out when I told him my plan. It was dark when the lovers, spies, poets, thieves, and magisters still occupying the public gardens were driven out by a sudden wave of throat-scouring fumes. The stuff was so powerful my eyes steamed as Mizzy and I sat on a pair of aqueducts below the reservoir. From that vantage, you saw the thing was shaped like an onion bulb on stilts. Dragons frolicked above.
"I think everyone's gone," said Mizzy.
There was still a little makeup on her chin. The Sikorax wouldn't know her, but Mizzy had insisted on going out in disguise anyway when she tossed those satchels about. The bags slowly baked in the sun, letting off their vapors when the night came and they cooled again. The alchemist had tried to explain it to me. I had told her it should be adequate for driving rats off my property. It's time. I gave Mizzy a gentle shove. Get up to where Dorian and his friend are. I'll give you a signal when I'm ready.
What's that?
Waving. Possibly some yelling. She nodded.
I like your clothes.
I was wearing the colorful sashes, capes, pants, shirt, belt, scarves, charms, and gold jewelry that are the right and privilege of any lord of fortune that lasts a year or two. Yes, like I'm wearing now. Noise wouldn't be a problem that night. I gave Mizzy a bangle, and her eyes went wide.
Oh, keep it always, even if you end up dying,
she told me. Then, with that slice of cheer, she ran off into the dark. I tied a wet scarf around my lower face. This would be the worst part. I saw glowing leaves shiver as I strolled, conspicuously, right through the gardens. The scarf helped with the fumes. Nothing else stopped me. As I walked, coughing a little, I saw coils slip out of sight, and heard a noise light as a sigh in the blossoms and the trellises and the trees.
Visitor, oh visitor, come to me.
It could draw you, that voice. It was too easy to slide to the center of that green maze, down the terraces to where the water in the fountain had rippled with the breeze. "Hello, again?" I choked out. "How've you been?" That tittering again, high and away. I saw 2 small dots of blue glow from a ledge on the tower, beside the reservoir. 2 vials of lyrium. Mages drink the stuff, sparingly, when they're about to undertake great works. Sikorax. I coughed again and projected my best pleading and yearning, a hopelessness that not enough is all life would ever be. Here I am. I give up. You can have me if... I beg a favor. Just one thing. I've only seen part of you. Your whole, great Sikorax. Before I die, that's what I want to see. The fountain gurgled, and eyes sprang from the bushes and under the water, strands of rope brazenly coiling up the trees.
Yes.
That awful voice fluted to me. Its flesh poured into the lawns around the fountain, churning balls of worms connecting and reforming. One teasingly sliced off one of my dangling scarves, held it in front of a curious eye as more and more of the monster drew itself out of the gardens, in front of me. I backed away, climbing onto the stone lip of the fountain. A 4-headed stone dragon spewed water into the basin.
Look,
the Sikorax said, as a mass as tall as a house undulated up, and peeled open at the top, like a lily, and tilted forward so I could see. There was a ring of heads. Dozens, not just 9. Their eyes were plucked out, their flesh otherwise whole and healthy. Squeezing tendrils ran inside, caressed the cheeks. A crown of the blind, lovingly carried inside that atrocity. When the Sikorax spoke, their silent mouths formed the dripping words.
Come inside and see.
I must have screamed and waved my arms because a ball of fire and stone cast from a pair of staffs smashed into the looming reservoir with incredible ferocity. It had never been built to withstand an assault, especially when packets of explosive Kunari Gathalok powder had been stuck there by some idiot earlier. There was a crack from the reservoir, then a terrible sensation of stone buckling, and a great weight sliding free. Even the Sikorax stopped writhing, turning its tendrils before a lake's worth of water swept over everything. I grabbed the fountain's dragons. The deluge ripped off my scarves, the charms, and necklaces. When the roaring became a stream and then a trickle, I threw up a lungful of water. Arms aching, I dragged my numb legs behind me as I climbed up the dragon heads. The bulk, that crown, rose untroubled, whipping its many limbs about as if it were shaking off a light rain. Other ropey strands slid through the water like eels circling the fountain. My hands groped back into the small pit where the dragons' heads met.
Come,
it said, as if it hadn't been interrupted.
See how nothing can hurt me. Come and be safe. Your true face forever. Be free.
I relaxed, nodding as those scalpel blades hummed. My hand closed on the harpoon that Mizzy had hidden earlier, and threw. It punctured the Sikorax's main mass with a squelch. A whirring blade sliced off one of the dragon's heads. A metal coil I had looped around the harpoon was now dangling in the water nicely. I ducked another blade and screamed up to the mages. "Now, please!" Lightning slammed into the upturned harpoon. The Sikorax shrieked. Everything in the water lit up, purple spots dancing in my eyes as it grew almost too bright to see. Flesh spasmed, every connected root and frond twisting. The Sikorax's main mass toppled and popped. Blue-white liquid poured into the water, dissolved.
Visitor!
It gurgled. Voices lost as heads toppled from the crown. The last one was barely a whisper.
What have you done to me?
I waited until the thrashing stopped, and all the worming ropes grew very still. The water continued to spark and sizzle, and I knew better than to leave. But I wanted to mark the victory. I was told to tell you, O Sikorax, that was from Mizzy. That was one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen in my life, Dorian said as we arrived at the bristling piles of the docks. We were in a carriage, drawn by those horse-sized lizards Tevinter likes so much. Even their draft animals are an oddity. Do you know what May and I found left of the Sikorax in that soup after it drained away? Dorian continued. A sort of skin, mostly. Like a sausage casing, I said helpfully. Please don't. I must ask, what was the Sikorax? Dorian smoothed down one side of his mustache. That soggy mess didn't do much to clear that up. Some ancient breed of demon? Some fiend brewed up by a magister. He looked pensive. I was at a party with one of those necromancers from down south a while ago. 5 cups in, she went on about things past the veil of our world. Neither demon nor spirit. Perhaps it wasn't the tipsy nonsense I assumed it to be. The lizards pulled the carriage over a high-arcing bridge. For once, at least in this thoroughfare, it was quiet in the city. Dorian stuck his head out for a moment to admire the sight, then drew back in. Mivaris sends her regards, by the way. I doubt that light show would have been so splendid without her help. She'd be here, but intrigue struck in the magisterium. Will she have to explain to them how the garden reservoir cracked open so mysteriously? I understand those dastardly perpetrators are long gone from the city. We are going to have a harder time explaining the lightning. It's been a while since I cast something so spectacular, and it practically lit up every corner of Minrathous. I hefted my purse. 500 aurum. No, Mizzy didn't ask for more, but after a night like that, I felt she acted so much like a lord of fortune in the making. Anything less than half was miserly. She and her sister were leaving the city for a while until the troublesome questions about who'd flooded whose public gardens faded from memory. If she liked, I had told Mizzy she might learn something from the Lords of Fortune in Ravane. "Oh, I've got loads of aunts and uncles and cousins south of here," she had said reproachfully. "I've got to take care of them now that I'm a rich lady. But when I grow up," she'd concluded, "maybe I'll visit. Don't forget me." Then she hugged me for a moment and ran into the crowds and was gone. The carriage pulled up to a clipper. The sails were pearl white, and its captain was already waiting. "Courtesy of Mevaris. I'll thank her for you. It's fast and reasonably comfortable even by my standards," Dorian said. "Everything's paid up for your journey." "You two are exceedingly generous," I replied, and meant it very much. "Consider it one last courtesy. May and I would hate to leave you with a bad impression of this fair city." I got out and took my packs, and looked at the clustered towers of Minrathous in the sunrise. For a moment, and from that angle, it was serenity. Turning to Dorian, I told him, "I wouldn't come back to Minrathous even if you paid me." Then I shrugged. "But a few of the people are very lovely." He laughed and waved goodbye as I set out on the boat to Ravane. I've since drilled a hole into one of those 500 golden coins and have it around my neck here, just for the memories. Anyhow, to answer your earlier question, that's the story about how I came by this map case, with sapphires of such fine quality. This has been Dragon Age, Tevinter Nights. Luck in the Gardens by Sylvia Feketekuty, and read by Kyle Bond. Until next time.